The Vorten Dominion's fleet descended on Mars like an iron fist, a well-oiled machine of destruction. Their warships, gleaming black and unyielding, blotted out the pale red sky. But they hadn't anticipated the storm. In the valley of Valles Marineris, human resistance fighters had already made their stand, retreating into the craggy canyons where the Vorten's high-tech sensor arrays were useless. Under the command of General Elena Kairos, the Martian militia had prepared for this day for years, knowing that the Dominion would come eventually. They didn't have the luxury of waiting for reinforcements. Earth's far-flung defense network couldn't respond in time. So they fought with what they had: ingenuity, desperation, and an unbreakable will. As the Vorten dropped from the sky, deploying their shock troops into the dust, the Martian militia struck. Hidden laser turrets blinked to life, blinding the Vorten's advanced optics. EMP pulses slammed into the air, frying half the invaders' drones in the first few seconds. A Vorten warship, sleek and designed to withstand direct hits, crumbled under the unexpected onslaught of homemade missiles launched from underground silos. The soldiers who had been trained for conquest now faced an enemy they didn't understand. Humans who fought not with precision, but with recklessness. General Kairos didn't command a fleet. She commanded chaos. Each tactic they used was a wild gamble. An ambush in the dead of night, a drone that unexpectedly released a swarm of wasp-sized explosives, or a decoy ship that led a fleet into a black hole of hostile gravity fields. The Vorten's precise strategies crumbled in the face of sheer unpredictability. On the ground, the situation was no less dire for the Vorten. Their elite troops, genetically engineered for strength and speed, struggled against a wave of human fighters who were resourceful and, most terrifying of all, stubborn. A squad of Earth Marines, armed only with scavenged energy rifles and old mining explosives, took down a fully armored Vorten general in a series of unpredictable guerrilla-style ambushes. The general had expected them to fall back, to submit. Instead, they came at him from every angle, forcing him to react, and eventually to flee. After the battle, the silence on Mars was deafening. The Vorten fleet, battered and bloodied, limped into orbit. The human survivors, though weary and scarred, were victorious. But they knew this was just the beginning. The Dominion would not stop with Mars. They would come for Earth, and humanity would be ready. The Vorten Dominion's retaliation was swift and brutal. Their massive invasion fleet descended upon Earth with the fury of a long-forgotten god, unleashing devastation on the planet's major cities. From the skyscrapers of New York to the ancient pyramids of Egypt, nothing was spared. The Vorten's high-tech weapons carved through Earth's defenses as if they were paper, and humanity seemed powerless to stop them. But the invaders underestimated the sheer unpredictability of their enemy. In New York, the Vorten expected a quick and effortless victory. They deployed their armored battalions to sweep through the streets, expecting humans to scatter in panic. But instead, they were met by a riot of sound and fury. A group of resistance fighters, led by the notorious ex-soldier Jax Kaladin, had infiltrated the city's infrastructure. The Vorten's first mistake was assuming that the city's chaos would work in their favor. Jax's team had turned the city's dense network of sewers and subways into a maze of traps and ambush points. As the Vorten advanced, they found themselves under fire from every direction. Homemade explosives triggered massive ripples of destruction, sending the invaders reeling. Drones that had been deployed to provide aerial support were taken out by a sudden swarm of anti-air missiles launched from civilian homes. No one could predict who would strike next. "We're fighting for everything," Jax growled over his comms, his voice hoarse but filled with determination. "We don't bend." Elsewhere, in the Amazon rainforest, the Vorten's overconfident march to claim Earth's resource-rich jungles was met with the raw force of nature. Expecting a simple military conquest, they deployed their most elite squads. Yet they were unprepared for the guerrilla warfare of Earth's indigenous tribes, who had long learned to survive under the harshest conditions. These fighters had no interest in surrender. They were defending not just their homes, but their way of life. The Vorten had underestimated how deeply humans could connect with their land. The jungle became their ally, and the invaders found themselves picked off one by one, ambushed in their own traps. The Vorten's advanced sensor systems could track almost any movement, but they couldn't account for Earth's endless, unpredictable wilderness. Even more surprising to the Vorten was the underground resistance. Nations and factions that had once been bitter enemies now united against the alien invaders. Armed with scavenged Vorten tech and old Earth weaponry, they launched counterattacks from every corner of the globe, striking the invaders where they least expected it. In every battle, every city, the same question began to echo through the Vorten ranks. How are they still fighting? It was no longer just about Earth's survival. It was about proving that humanity could not be crushed, no matter how relentless the enemy. And in the midst of it all, something strange began to happen. The Vorten fleet began to retreat from Earth's atmosphere, regrouping in orbit, hesitant for the first time. The Vorten Dominion's shockwave attack on Earth had been devastating, but what followed next was far more unsettling for the invaders. After their initial victories, they had expected the humans to collapse under the pressure. Instead, the resistance grew stronger, more unified, and their response became increasingly unpredictable. Captured human soldiers were paraded in front of Vorten commanders, their faces bruised and bloodied. The Vorten were certain they could break the human spirit. After all, they had crushed entire civilizations with a single command. But there was something about humanity that was different. On the Vorten warship Tyrants' Judgment, a high-ranking officer, General Veroth, prepared to interrogate a group of human captives. These weren't soldiers. They were civilians, engineers, and scientists. He believed that with them, he could extract the knowledge needed to crush the human resistance once and for all. He expected fear, perhaps even pleading. Instead, the humans laughed. "Are you finding this amusing?" Veroth demanded, his voice cold and commanding, his eyes narrow behind his iron mask. The youngest of the prisoners, a woman named Sarah, smirked despite the bruises on her face. "Amusing? Terrifying," she said with a wink. "You've never been this close to someone who doesn't fear you." Veroth's brow furrowed in confusion. He had watched entire civilizations break under the weight of Vorten interrogation. But this was different. Sarah's words were laced with defiance, and as his soldiers dragged her away, she continued to laugh, a sound that echoed in his ears long after she was gone. The next day, another group of prisoners, this time soldiers who had been captured during the chaos of Earth's failed defense, was brought in. Veroth expected them to be broken, willing to divulge every detail of Earth's remaining defenses. Instead, they were eerily calm, even in the face of death. The interrogation lasted for hours, but the soldiers spoke little. They wouldn't reveal their plans, their locations, or their strategies. Instead, they recited jokes, sang old songs, and told stories about their families back home. Every answer was a diversion, a move designed to frustrate, to break the Vorten's calm facade. When Veroth's patience finally wore thin, he ordered the execution of the prisoners, a public spectacle meant to strike fear into the remaining resistance. But when the moment came, the prisoners laughed again. As their lives were extinguished, they laughed. And somehow, that infuriated the Vorten even more. In every battle, every prison, humanity's will was revealed. It was not fear or desperation driving them. It was something far more dangerous: stubbornness. The Vorten came to realize that no matter what they did, no matter how much pain they inflicted, they could not break these humans. And worse, they couldn't predict them. This human spirit, this refusal to submit, began to spread across Earth. The Vorten were not fighting a war anymore. They were fighting a concept they could not defeat. The Vorten Dominion's arrogance was their downfall. They had been so accustomed to crushing civilizations with overwhelming force that they didn't consider the possibility that their greatest enemy wouldn't come at them directly, but from the shadows. The first sign of humanity's counterstrike came not in the form of a battle, but a whisper, One of their own Vorten transport ships, full of vital supplies for a forward operating base on Earth's moon, mysteriously vanished during transit. No explosion. No warning. Just gone. The Vorten thought it was a fluke, until it happened again. And again. Soon, the Vorten fleet found itself stretched thin, unable to secure their own supply lines. Small groups of human engineers and hackers had infiltrated their communications networks, dismantling their tracking systems and rerouting their ships into uncharted space. No shots were fired. No blood was shed. But the damage was crippling. Then came the strikes. Hidden ships, piloted by humans who had never seen a battlefield, began picking off Vorten supply convoys. These were civilians, people who had no official rank or training. But they knew one thing. Their world was under attack, and they would do whatever it took to fight back. With only basic training in scavenged Vorten technology, they had turned humanity's greatest weakness into their greatest strength: adaptability. It was as if the Vorten had been fighting a dragon, a massive, terrifying beast that bared its fangs and struck with devastating force. But now, the dragon was silent, vanishing into the night, only to strike again when the Vorten least expected it. The strikes were small, almost invisible, but relentless. General Veroth, still reeling from the unbreakable human prisoners he'd interrogated, received word that his flagship was under attack. A group of human mercenaries, led by the infamous Captain Lila Voss, had boarded the ship using nothing more than stolen cloaking tech and homemade explosives. They infiltrated the Vorten ship undetected and disabled its shields, rendering it vulnerable to a barrage of stolen missiles. In moments, the ship's mighty defenses crumbled, leaving the Vorten scrambling. What the hell is happening? Veroth seethed, staring at the reports flooding his terminal. Who are these people? The humans had learned to use the Vorten's own systems against them, and now their strikes were more than just tactical. They were psychological. The Vorten commanders could no longer trust their own ships, their own technology, or even their own security. For the first time in the war, the Vorten began to question their superiority. They had come to Earth believing they could squash humanity in a matter of weeks. Now they realized the terrible truth. Humanity could never be predicted. They were everywhere, silent, patient, and always ready to strike when least expected. The war had entered a new phase. The humans were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to show the Vorten that nothing could break them, not even the greatest empire in the galaxy. The tide of the war had shifted, but the Vorten were slow to recognize it. Their military might, their vast fleets, and their genetically engineered super soldiers had all been tested and found wanting. The Vorten Empire had once ruled through sheer force, unquestioned, untouchable. Now, their grip on the galaxy was slipping, and they couldn't stop it. It started with the whispers, then the rumors. Vorten commanders received strange reports from their far-flung colonies. Civilian populations, once submissive, had begun to revolt. Entire systems that had once bent the knee to the Dominion were now refusing to send reinforcements. Worlds that had always lived in fear were suddenly sending broadcasts of defiance. The first major defection came from the planet Velorith, a world that had been a staunch ally of the Vorten for centuries. In the dead of night, its military leaders, fed up with the Vorten's growing brutality, turned their guns on the Dominion's occupying forces. They declared their independence from the Empire, offering sanctuary to any Vorten deserter who was willing to join the cause. The Vorten leadership was blindsided. The rebellion wasn't just on Earth anymore. It was spreading across the stars. And the one thing the Vorten never anticipated was that humans weren't just defending their own planet. They were infecting others with their idea of freedom. And as humanity's message spread, more systems began to rally to their side. Back on Earth, the fractured human resistance had united. What was once a loose network of rebels, mercenaries, and militia groups was now a cohesive force. Earth's leadership had created a unified front, bringing together not just Earth's nations, but also Martian and lunar colonies, and those humans who had escaped to the Outer Rim. The Vorten could no longer target specific leaders or key locations. The entire human race was now a threat. Then, in a shocking turn of events, a Vorten admiral named Irithar, once a fierce supporter of the Dominion's cause, made an unthinkable decision. He defected. With his entire fleet, he tore through the Vorten ranks, shattering their lines with the very same Vorten ships they had used to terrorize humanity. Admiral Irithar broadcasted his defection across every Vorten communication channel, his voice cutting through the airwaves with cold clarity. "We are no longer the masters of the galaxy. The time has come for the Vorten to kneel. This empire will fall, and humanity will be its reckoning." The Vorten High Command reeled from the news. They had long viewed themselves as the apex of creation, immortal, unassailable. But with each defection, with each rebellion, their walls began to crumble. They could not understand it. How had this weak, divided species brought them to the brink of ruin? And worse, how could they stop it? The fall of the Vorten had begun, but it would not be without a fight. And for the first time, they knew something deeply unsettling. Humanity had already won, in ways the Vorten would never fully understand. Enoch's cradle was the heart of the Vorten Dominion, its capital world, the cradle of their empire. A planet of unimaginable beauty, covered in crystalline cities and lush landscapes, it was a symbol of their power and indomitable strength. But now it had become a symbol of their downfall. The human resistance, having tasted victory after victory across the galaxy, now focused all their efforts on a final, all-or-nothing strike against the Vorten's nerve center. With the full support of their newfound allies from across the stars, Earth's leaders, now united with Martian, lunar, and Velarith rebels, began planning the most ambitious military campaign in human history, the assault on Enoch's cradle. For the first time, humanity had gathered every faction, every fleet, and every individual that could be spared for this momentous battle. What they lacked in raw numbers, they made up for in sheer determination, unpredictability, and above all, unity. Captain Eric Kane, a man who had led countless raids and guerrilla attacks, was given command of the mission. His fleet was a patchwork of human vessels, some stolen, some repurposed from the wreckage of earlier battles, augmented by defected Vorten ships, their cloaking systems now in the hands of humans who knew how to use them. His strategy was simple but audacious: strike fast, strike hard, and exploit every weakness the Vorten had left. The attack began with a series of coordinated strikes across Enoch's cradle's orbit. Human engineers had cracked the code to the Vorten's gravitational defense platforms, allowing Eric's ships to slip through the cracks in their once impregnable outer defenses. Dozens of human-run vessels broke through, cloaked and undetected, and launched devastating surprise attacks on Vorten supply hubs and infrastructure. The skies over Enoch's cradle burned as missiles rained down on cities, and Vorten warships erupted in clouds of fire. It was chaos. But this time, the Vorten were caught off guard. Their elite soldiers, accustomed to facing enemies that fought according to their rules, had no idea how to react to the madness unleashed by human ingenuity. The Vorten fleet, unable to adapt to the relentless guerrilla tactics of the humans, faltered. Every step they took was met with unpredictability. On the ground, human commandos infiltrated the planet's capital city, smashing into government buildings with explosive charges, taking out vital communication hubs, and releasing waves of incendiary attacks. The Vorten's prized military command center, nestled deep in the heart of the planet's crystalline core, was quickly compromised. In the chaos, a broadcast flickered across the Vorten communication channels. "We are not your slaves. You will fall, and we will rise." It was a human voice, a symbol of the resistance, and it was a promise, not just to the Vorten, but to the galaxy. Enoch's cradle was no longer invincible. Humanity's final stand was just beginning. The battle for Enoch's cradle had reached its crescendo. Across the planet, the Vorten Dominion's once imposing military was being torn apart by human ingenuity and relentless will. What had started as a strike to break the heart of the Empire had become something much greater: the destruction of an idea. The Vorten, who had believed themselves invincible, were now scrambling to hold together a crumbling empire. General Varoth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, his jaw clenched with frustration. Despite every countermeasure and elite soldier he had at his disposal, humanity had proven to be a foe unlike any he had ever encountered. The Vorten fleet, once vast and unchallenged, was now reduced to scattered pockets of resistance, unable to coordinate or respond effectively. Their prized war machines lay broken, decimated by human tactics they had never even anticipated. What's left? Varoth barked at his second-in-command, his voice betraying a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Sir, our command centers are compromised, and several of our major cities are in ruins. The resistance has breached the inner sanctum," the officer replied, her face pale with exhaustion. "We are losing, General." Varoth's fists tightened on the console. He had been bred for war, conditioned for victory, but now he was faced with an impossible choice: retreat or fight until the bitter end. He had seen the Vorten Empire destroy countless civilizations, leaving nothing but ashes. Yet now, it was his people on the brink of annihilation. The realization struck him hard. He had underestimated the resilience of the humans. Meanwhile, Captain Eric Kane stood on the bridge of the Eclipse, the flagship of the human fleet. His eyes were focused on the planet's surface, watching the massive clouds of smoke and debris billow into the atmosphere. It was a scene of victory, but also one of grief. The human cost had been great: lives lost, worlds shattered, but the end was now in sight. "We've done it," Eric muttered, though there was no joy in his voice. His thoughts lingered on those he had lost: his crew, his comrades, the soldiers who had fallen in the name of something greater than survival. Behind him, General Elena Kairos, the leader of Earth's forces, stepped forward. "Not yet, Captain. We can't stop until the Vorten command structure is fully dismantled. The war ends when we take their last stronghold, not before." Eric nodded. He understood. On the surface of Enoch's cradle, the final assault was nearing its climax. Human forces, now joined by the defected Vorten and other allied species, fought their way into the deepest chambers of the Vorten capital. The enemy, desperate and broken, fought back with the last of their strength, but they were no longer an unstoppable force. The time for Vorten dominance had passed. The final hour was upon them. And when the dust settled, Enoch's cradle would be a reminder of the cost of underestimating humanity's resolve. The final assault on Enoch's cradle ended not with the roar of explosions or the flash of lasers, but with a profound silence. For the first time in generations, the Vorten Dominion found itself in the grips of complete and utter defeat. The once mighty empire that had consumed worlds, annihilated civilizations, and ruled with cold precision was now nothing more than a shattered remnant of its former glory. Captain Eric Kane and General Elena Kairos stood side by side in the heart of Enoch's cradle, watching as the last remnants of the Vorten military surrendered. The city they stood in was a place of ancient power, a city of crystal spires that once symbolized the strength of the Vorten, now reduced to rubble. The quiet that had settled over the battlefield was both eerie and triumphant. There was no more fighting to be done. "The Vorten are finished," Eric said softly, his voice carrying the weight of their long struggle. "But what now?" Elena's gaze remained focused on the distant horizon, the sun beginning to rise over the ruins. "Now we rebuild. Not just Earth, but all the worlds that suffered under their yoke. We have to ensure this doesn't happen again." Across the globe, across the stars, humanity's victory had been heard. Messages of freedom spread like wildfire, carried by the stars themselves. From the planets that had long been oppressed by the Vorten to the colonies that had fought on Earth's behalf, the message was the same. The Vorten were no longer masters of the galaxy. Humanity had shown the universe that even the mightiest empire could be toppled, not by force alone, but by will, unity, and a refusal to yield. Back on Earth, nations and colonies began to unite under a single banner. They knew the struggle had been costly, but they had learned an invaluable lesson. Humanity was stronger together, and its true power lay not in its weapons, but in its unbreakable spirit. At the heart of the rebuilding effort stood the idea that had carried them through the war: freedom. Earth's leaders, once divided by politics and petty squabbles, now sought to create a new era of cooperation and peace. With the Vorten threat finally extinguished, humanity began to reshape the galaxy, not through conquest, but through alliance, understanding, and innovation. The galaxy would never be the same. The Vorten Dominion, once a symbol of invincibility, was now scattered and broken. The remnants of their empire would be relegated to the past, a cautionary tale of arrogance and underestimation. And humanity, they had not just survived, they had proven that no matter the odds, they could rise, fight, and forge a new destiny. In the ruins of Enoch's cradle, as the sun rose higher, Eric and Alina stood together, knowing their work was far from done, but also knowing that the future they built would be theirs to shape. The universe was now wide open, and humanity was its new hope.